Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here with my Friday reads as usual. I read 4 books this week and they were all quite good. So last weekend I sat and I read Prognosis on Wheels by Christopher Morley, and this is book 1 in the duology of books that he wrote about bookshop owner Mr. Miffin. And in this very first book, Mr. Miffin owns a bookshop on wheels. He has his horse Pegasus and he pulls this cart across the country and goes from town to town, farmhouse to farmhouse. But one day he decides that he wants to sell his bookshop on wheels, and go back to New York to live with his brother, where he's going to write a book. And he hears about this famous author that lives nearby, and off he goes to that author's farm to try and sell the traveling bookshop to him. But when he arrives, the author, Andrew, is not home. Rather, his sister Helen is, and Helen doesn't want her brother Andrew to catch sight of this traveling bookshop, because she knows that if he sees it, he'll want to buy it and he'll go off gallivanting around the country for months and months, and she'll have no idea where he is or when he's coming back. And she is just sick of him being a writer. He wasn't a writer when they moved out to this farm. They were living quite peacefully until Andrew decided to write a book. And then he decided he needed to go off on trips to get inspiration for more books. And he would often just up and leave one day, leaving a note. She stayed at home and she did all the cooking and all the cleaning. And she decides that after, everything she's done, she's underappreciated, and so she decides to pull one and she buys the bookshop, and off she goes on an adventure, leaving a note for her brother, who absolutely flips out when he finds the note and tries to chase her down. And Mr. Miffin, who has sold her the bookshop, is going to go along with her for a bit and show her the ropes, so to speak, and she's going to give him a ride to the train station. But hilarity and misunderstandings ensue, and there's a little bit of romance, and it's quite a delightful book. I think I liked it just as well as The Haunted Bookshop. Although when I went to rate this, I gave it 5 stars, and I gave The Haunted Bookshop 4 stars, although maybe I would give that one 5 stars if I were to rate it now, because they are both quite fun, excellent books. And this is an American book, published initially in 1917. So that's why the bookshop on wheels is drawn by horse rather than being a truck. So I read that, and then last weekend I also dove into the Old Houses of StratforduponAvon by H.E. Forrest. And this is quite literally a book about the houses, the old houses in Stratford-upon-Avon in England. And so it's got wonderful illustrations throughout, 37 illustrations it says on this front page. I don't know the exact publication date, but I did look it up online, and this book was originally published in 1925, so I would suspect that since there's no publication date anywhere in sight, and given the way the book looks, that it could very well be that original 1925 printing. But the author goes through and talks about how to identify the age of a house. He goes through a whole section of musing about who owned what house, when it was built, who built it, who lived in it after it was built. And he goes, street by street in this town. He talks about, at length, a spot called the Great House, now known as Shakespeare Hotel, and he sort of refutes the common story of who built it, and rather says, I found this old document, this is the house this guy is referring to, not this other house you're thinking of. So I'm not going to say it's a thrilling read, but it was, an interesting armchair read for a Sunday. Then I finished The Portrait of a Lady this week by Henry James. And I didn't love it, but I greatly enjoyed this novel until I got to the ending. So I guess Henry James is known for his ambiguous endings. I didn't know that, so it was a little bit jarring to realize that I had finished. It did take sort of the route I expected it to take, and overall it's just a very interesting novel. It's certainly not a romance novel. It's about a woman who is a free spirit of sorts, someone who tries to be independent, but she's no one, exemplary. She's no one special. She's just an ordinary woman, an ordinary lady who has a desire to be independent, has a desire to have an intellectual life of some sort, but she's not, immensely smart, and she gets manipulated by some people who think they're doing what's best for her, ends up in a situation that makes her quite unhappy, and then she doesn't quite know how to get out of it. And that sounds quite depressing, and her life does seem, after a certain point, a little bit on the depressing side, but it comes across as a very real novel, true to life, which I think is interesting. And I'm not going to do it this week, but once I get back from my Christmas holidays, I may do a straight up review or discussion video about this book, because I do feel I have more to say on it, just not quite yet. I'm sort of letting the book percolate a bit with me. Then today I finished The Fourth Musketeer, The Life of Alexander Dumas, which I also picked up last weekend. And this is by Maida Castlehunt Darton, translated by J. Lucas Dumbarton. And this is a biography of Alexander Dumas. I knew nothing about the author, although I have read some of his most famous works, The Count of Monte Cristo, The Three Musketeers, and I've also read The Black Tulip, which is quite a funny novel if you haven't read it. The Black Tulip is a novel about these two rival Dutch tulip growers who are both trying to create a tulip, trying to engineer a tulip that is completely black with no imperfections in that blackness. And they're sort of a race against time and a competition with each other to be the one to do it first. I don't recall much more about it than that. It's been many years, so perhaps I'm due for a reread on that one. But for that reason, I was interested in this book. I picked it up for $1 at Boxscore Books. I would guess there's probably better biographies out there. It was interesting, but it didn't go a lot into depth. There are a couple of things that I think a biography needs to be something, a couple of things I think a biography needs to be good and to be something that I like. To be good, it has to place the reader within the historical context. So I think the author here was assuming that I, as the reader, had more historical knowledge about France than I did. He talks throughout here about a bunch of revolutions and political events that sort of went way over my head because I don't have that knowledge of French history. So that's, I think if the author had gone into more detail and placed us as the reader in this historical context and explained a few more things, then I would have understood Dumas a little better and his role within those events. Two here, this is what makes a good biography for me, but I like to hear about the influences on a person of note, especially on an author, and I didn't really get that. Here we got some little anecdotes about his relationship with other authors, but not a lot of depth in there too. It was, despite being a fairly large size book, the print is fairly large in here too, and so it's actually not a very long book, and it's a quick skim through his life. And I guess I just would have liked something more in depth, and so I need to find a biography that does that for me. And I did learn some interesting things. I didn't realize that Victor Hugo was a contemporary of his, so that was interesting to read about their sometimes friendly, sometimes tense relationship, although it would have been interesting to get even more on that. If anything, what this biography did was whet my appetite for a better biography, which I may look into in the new year. I had thought I might give this book as a gift to my sister, who also likes Dumas, but I think I'll skip it because I'm not sure this is the kind of biography that would hold her interest either. So that's what I've been up to reading in the past week. I'm going to be taking the train back to my parents' place for Christmas, and I'm taking a volume of Proust with me. So my next Friday reads, if I do manage to film it, it'll all depend on whether I get an hour or so of alone time at my parents' place, because I'm not going to do it with a bunch of people around. So if they all go out and I'm left at their house for a little bit, then perhaps I'll get my Friday reads. But if not, there may not be a Friday reads at all next week. But if I do film that Friday reads, you'll hear me talk about Proust. I hope you all had a lovely reading week, and happy holidays.